can't tell you what was the origin of those lights. It seemed odd. It was certainly out of place. It didn't make sense. However, a lot of the testimonies I've heard, and a lot of researchers would tell you that they've heard stories of white lights and Bigfoot.
In the southeastern corner of the target zone, near the base of Pine Mountain, Russell Acord was on a mission. He had heard countless stories of strange lights, eerie noises, and mysterious sightings in this place. But nothing compared to what he had witnessed the night before. With his tent and camera gear destroyed, he was dead set on finding out what was really happening in these woods. Strange lights. As an experienced researcher, he had heard many testimonies linking the strange lights he had seen to Bigfoot sightings. Similar stories had surfaced in Oregon the previous year. Whether he believed in these connections or not, he couldn't ignore what he had seen. The lights could have a simple explanation, or they could be something far more complex. Regardless, Russell was determined to investigate. He disliked unanswered questions. As he moved through the dense woods, his keen eyes caught sight of something unexpected: an old, rusted truck, abandoned for decades. Though fascinating, it was not what he was after. The vehicle certainly hadn't been responsible for the mysterious lights.
I don't know what was the source of those lights, but we're running out of time, and I still have so much area I have to cover. So I think we're gonna back away from this area and work our way towards Pine Mountain and get into some of those spots that I've been looking for.
With time running out and more ground to cover, he decided to press forward, shifting his focus toward Pine Mountain, a location rumored to house a massive cave system spanning 125 miles. Such a network of caves could provide the perfect hiding spot for something as elusive as Bigfoot. The trail camera discovery. On his way, Russell made a stop to retrieve some of his equipment, including a trail camera that he had set up to capture any unusual activity in the area. As he approached the spot where the camera had been placed, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The camera should have been right in front of him, but instead, the area was a mess. Something had completely destroyed it. Upon closer inspection, he noticed deep scratches on the tree where the camera had once been mounted. The device itself was in pieces, as if it had been chewed or clawed apart. Large depressions in the dirt suggested that a sizable creature had passed through. His first assumption was a bear, but something didn't add up. Wild animals typically ignored cameras. They weren't known to attack objects that simply took pictures. This was highly unusual. Despite the damage, there was still hope. The camera's memory card might have survived, possibly holding footage of whatever had destroyed it. But as he searched for the tiny chip, it became apparent that it was missing.
There's some scratches on the tree, so my first instinct is it looked like a bear, but generally the animals don't go after what's taking the pictures. So that is a bit odd.
Without it, the mystery would remain unsolved. As he scanned the ground, his senses went on high alert. Something was off. Then, from above, a loud crashing sound broke the silence. Debris rained down around him. Something, or someone, was nearby, watching him. It was time to leave, seeking shelter in the storm. As Russell attempted to move to a safer location, the weather took a turn for the worse. A powerful storm rolled in, bringing heavy rain and dangerous lightning. Staying in the open was no longer an option. He quickly found a spot at the base of Pine Mountain to set up camp, hoping to wait out the storm. The wind howled as he hastily assembled his tent. It was the fastest he had ever put one together. Night was falling, and if the rain stopped, he would resume his investigation. But as he settled in, another shock awaited him. Returning to his camp after a brief scouting trip, he found his shelter in ruins. The tent had been violently ransacked. His first thought was a bear. After all, he had seen signs of bears in the area for days. But something about this situation didn't sit right. If a bear had attacked his camp, it would have been drawn to food. Yet, his backpack, which contained trail mix, was untouched. The destruction seemed deliberate, yet the most obvious motive, food, was missing. A foul stench was in the air, an odor so strong and unpleasant that it made his stomach turn. It was nothing like the smell of a bear or any other animal he had encountered before. He had heard from other researchers that strange, overpowering smells often accompanied Bigfoot sightings. Was this another sign? The encounter. Then, a sudden movement caught his attention. Small objects were being tossed in his path, almost as if something was trying to slow him down or steer him in a particular direction.
The closer I'm getting to Pine Mountain, the more aggressive activities seem to be happening around this. It's like things are being thrown in my path to either slow me down or to stop me. The more you head a certain direction and the more resistance you get in that path is nothing but more evidence that you're on the right trail.
The deeper he ventured into the wilderness, the more resistance he encountered. It was as if he was being warned. Despite the eerie feeling settling in his chest, he knew he couldn't turn back. He had come too far, and he needed answers. Carefully, he pressed forward, navigating the rough, dangerous terrain. The rumors of a hidden cave system beneath Pine Mountain had always fascinated him, and now, more than ever, he needed to find proof. The cave discovery. The rocky terrain grew more unstable the further he climbed. Slipping and stumbling over loose stones, he finally reached an opening in the mountain. As he peered inside, his breath caught. The cave extended deep into the darkness, its depth impossible to gauge from where he stood. Piles of leaves had been pushed aside at the entrance, indicating that something or someone had used this place for shelter. The overwhelming stench returned, even stronger this time. His instincts told him he was standing at the threshold of something significant.
This opening could be the doorway to the answers I've been looking for 40 years.
Everything he had experienced over the past few days, the strange lights, the destroyed camera, the ransacked camp, had led him to this very spot. For over 40 years, he had searched for answers. Now, standing before the gaping entrance of the cave, he felt closer than ever. If Bigfoot existed, this could be its home. And if that were true, then he was about to uncover the truth once and for all. This was not the first time someone had come face to face with the unknown in these dense woods. 1965, North California. Just a few decades earlier, in 1965, in the heart of Northern California's Humboldt County, another group of individuals would experience their own terrifying encounter with what they believed to be the legendary creature. This place was unlike any other. It had wild rivers, towering coastal mountains, and endless stretches of dense redwood forests. Redwood National Park, Humboldt Redwood State Park, and the famous Avenue of the Giants were all part of this vast, untamed landscape. But Humboldt County was also known for something else, something far more mysterious. It had more Bigfoot sightings than any other county in California, and California itself had more Bigfoot sightings than almost any other state in the U.S., except for Washington. This was a place where people whispered about strange creatures in the woods, where stories of enormous shadowy figures lurking among the trees had been passed down for generations. Amid this wilderness, 4 boys found themselves on an adventure. They weren't looking for anything supernatural. They were just out to explore, to have a night of fun and freedom. They came across an old abandoned cabin, tucked away in the thick woods. It seemed like the perfect spot to spend the night. It was isolated, quiet, almost too quiet. Fixing the cabin. Over the next few days, the boys kept coming back to the cabin. They swept out the dust, cleared away old debris, and even nailed a few loose boards back into place. It wasn't much, but to them, it was perfect. A secret hideout deep in the forest where they could hang out away from the world. Butch found an old wooden crate in the corner and flipped it over to make a makeshift table. Keith brought a few old chairs from home, and Joe even dragged in an old mattress he found by the roadside. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but they didn't care. It was their place now. It was peaceful. But something about the forest felt different at night. The shadows stretched longer, the sounds of the woods became unfamiliar, and the feeling of being watched started creeping in. Mike was the first to say something. "You guys ever get the feeling like we're not alone out here?" The others laughed, but deep down, they all felt it too. Maybe it was just their imaginations. Or maybe it wasn't. The boys eventually started working on the cabin, fixing it up little by little. Keith, whose dad was in construction, managed to get some extra carpet, and they laid it over the hardwood floor to make it feel more comfortable. Inside, there were 2 old beds, so they rotated the mattresses to freshen them up. They also replaced a couple of broken window panes, fixed the door so it swung smoothly, and even added a latch to lock it at night. It was coming together, and they were excited to have a proper place to call their own. That summer, in July of 1965, the boys spent most of their time at what they had started calling the shack. One afternoon, Joe had an idea. "What if we spent the weekend here, like a real campout?" The others immediately agreed. It sounded like an adventure. They gathered their gear, Army surplus rucksacks packed with sleeping bags, food, and other supplies. A couple of them brought along a Coleman lantern and a 2-burner stove, and Joe even packed his .22 rifle, a gift from his grandfather. He tucked it into his backpack and secured the flap over it before riding out to the shack with the others. When they arrived, they rolled out their bedrolls. Butch and Joe took the beds on opposite sides of the cabin, while Mike and Keith spread their sleeping bags on the floor. They set up the stove and positioned the lantern, getting everything ready for the night ahead. The night of the encounter. As the sun started to dip behind the trees, Joe suggested some target practice. The group eagerly grabbed the rifle and headed around the back of the shack. There was an old dump site behind the cabin where they found a pile of rusty beer cans. They lined them up on a fallen log and took turns shooting. The crisp ping of metal echoed through the quiet woods as they laughed and competed to see who had the best aim. Before long, the light was fading and their stomachs started to rumble. "All right, let's head back and make some dinner," one of them said. They returned to the cabin, lit the stove, and started cooking. The smell of boiling hot dogs, beans, and sizzling French fries filled the air as they gathered around, enjoying the warmth of the lantern and the crackling sound of the food. Just as they were settling in, Keith stood up, and since there was no bathroom or outhouse, he headed outside, walking around the side of the cabin into a small clearing. He went about 10 feet into the dense forest, just far enough for privacy. As he finished up, he suddenly heard something, a low, murmuring sound. It was faint, almost like whispering voices. His first thought was that a couple of the guys had followed him out, maybe trying to play a prank. He took a few steps toward the noise, which seemed to be coming from about 20 feet away in the thick underbrush. Keith called out to his friends. No answer came, but the murmuring stopped. The silence that followed was unnerving. A chill ran down his spine. If it wasn't his friends, then who or what was out there? Before he could think, the quiet was shattered. Something huge came crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches and barreling straight toward him. The sound was fast, powerful, too big to be a deer. His instincts screamed at him to run. Without hesitation, he spun around and bolted toward the cabin, his heart pounding. He reached the front door in record time, burst inside, and slammed it shut behind him. Gasping for breath, he locked the latch with shaking hands. The boys stood frozen, their eyes locked on the door, as the sound of heavy footsteps crunched through the underbrush. Whatever was out there was moving slowly, circling the cabin, each step deliberate and measured. The air inside felt thick with tension, and nobody dared to move. Keith, still pressed against the door, could feel his body trembling. He had seen plenty of deer and even the occasional bear in the woods before, but nothing had ever moved like that. It wasn't just the speed that had scared him. It was the way the thing had stopped as soon as he called out, as if it understood him. Butch kept his grip tight on the rifle. He had fired plenty of times at cans and bottles, but now, holding it against something unknown, his hands were damp with sweat. He slowly lifted it toward the window, angling for a view of the forest beyond. The night outside was dark, the thick tree cover blocking out most of the moonlight. Only the dim glow from their lantern inside reflected against the glass. It was hard to make out shapes beyond the tree line, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Then, suddenly, a loud thud hit the cabin wall, just beneath the window. The entire structure shook from the impact. Dust and splinters rained down from the wooden beams overhead. The boys flinched, their hearts pounding in their chests. Joe took a hesitant step back, eyes darting between his friends. They were all thinking the same thing. Was it trying to get in? It was here for them. The sound of heavy breathing drifted through the cracks in the cabin wall, low and raspy. The breathing was slow, controlled, almost like whatever was outside knew it had their full attention. Keith's throat was dry, but his mind raced. If it had wanted to break in, it could have done so already. But it wasn't smashing the windows or throwing itself against the door. It was toying with them. Then another noise, this one different, the sound of something shifting through the leaves and brush just outside. Not footsteps, but something else. A dragging sound. Butch's grip tightened around the rifle as he braced himself near the window. He knew that if it came down to it, he'd have to fire. But at what? More movement. A deep, guttural grunt, followed by another scraping sound, this time on the front door. It was slow, methodical, like fingers running down the wooden surface. The boys were trapped. There was only one way out, the front door, but nobody was willing to open it. Then, from the darkness outside, a single chilling noise cut through the night. A long, deep, guttural howl. Not a wolf, not a coyote. Something else entirely. Something bigger. The boys' blood ran cold. Whatever was outside wasn't just passing through. It was here for them. Shots fired. Mike decided to light the lantern. He rolled over, struck a match, and turned the lantern on, pumping it to get it going. But the lantern didn't seem to work properly. Meanwhile, they could hear something moving around in front of the cabin. There was a window to the right of the front door, and through it, they saw a dark shape pass by, blocking the light briefly before disappearing into the night. Moonlight from the south illuminated the area outside, where a bucket sat next to the front door. Something bumped into the bucket, making a noise, but it was brief. Keith suggested opening the front door, but he wasn't sure it was a good idea. Butch, however, urged him to open it, asking if Keith had a better suggestion. Without waiting for a reply, Butch reached under the bed, pulled out a .22 rifle, and loaded it. He sat up in bed, aiming the gun at the door. Keith hesitated, but eventually turned the door handle. As he opened the door, the light from the lantern made it difficult to see what was outside. Standing in the doorway was a large, dark figure with hairy legs and part of its torso visible above the doorframe. In a split second, Keith fired 2 shots from the rifle toward the figure. The creature let out a terrifying scream, spun around, and ran off with heavy thuds as it headed toward the tree line. The sounds of branches breaking echoed in the distance before everything fell silent. Keith quickly shut the door and latched it, and everyone stood up. Joe immediately spoke up, saying that what they had seen was definitely not a bear. The group started talking about what to do next, and Butch said if the creature came back, they needed to be ready. He asked for help and moved to the back of the bed, where he began pushing it toward the door. 2 others helped him, and they secured the bed in front of the door. They knew they couldn't leave on their bikes and couldn't contact anyone since it was 1965. They had to make do. The scariest night ever. The group gathered their sleeping bags and placed them in the center of the floor, huddling together for the rest of the night, hoping the creature wouldn't return. The next morning, they all got up, exhausted from the poor sleep, and went outside to investigate. They found a few indentations in front of the cabin, where the creature had turned around. They also saw strange tracks leading toward the forest, with large footprints, but no blood was found. Butch insisted they leave immediately if the creature came back, so they packed up their gear and left on their bikes, never returning to the cabin. They all agreed not to tell their parents what had happened, unsure of how they would react or even what exactly had occurred. The next day, they met up again to talk about the event and try to make sense of it. Joe recalled that his grandfather used to tell stories about a creature called the Hay Man. This seemed to connect to the strange events they had experienced, especially since Joe's grandfather had mentioned that the Hoopa tribe of Northern California had a name for such beings, Om, which translated to boss of the woods. They concluded that what they had encountered was likely a Sasquatch. 20 years later, they remained friends and could still discuss the event. Keith always remembered the tall, hairy legs and the large figure in the doorway, which he believed was the same creature he had felt in the forest when he was alone. The thought still gave him chills and kept him awake at night. And that was the story from Northern California in Humboldt County, a wild Bigfoot encounter from 1965.